Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Our job as members of the General Assembly is to debate and make thoughtful, intelligent decisions on public policy. That's our job. I'm very pleased by all of the nice commentary that preceded me here regarding working together on various things, and it certainly does happen. I think the majority of the items on this agenda today are going to be voted out of here affirmatively by almost everyone, if not unanimously. But there are certain areas where there is a difference of opinion, for sure. And I can respect that. In fact, I have a great deal of respect for my colleagues in the other party when they come informed and passionately convey their views and ideas in a way that makes me understand that they truly believe what they are attempting to do is the right thing to create thoughtful, intelligent public policy. The thing is that I find it remarkable that we're having this kumbaya moment on this bill, because this bill is not about thoughtful, intelligent public policy. This bill is about politics. Just like last year we had a bill about bump stocks, another bill also about politics. They might have fancy titles and gin up a segment of the population to discuss these items, but they have very, very little to do with improving public safety. And I don't think this is what our constituents want from us. I think they want us to work together to make thoughtful, intelligent public policy. So the language that's before us, I just had a few minutes to look at it because this is apparently being described as a placeholder bill that contains some elements that members of both parties in all four caucuses would like to see make it into the final language, whether they support it or not. And I can certainly respect that. I had intended on speaking at some length about the bill that was before us at the public hearing and that we were supposed to vote on today because I believe that bill was an utter disaster and could not be implemented because it was so poorly conceived. So I'm just going to speak generally about the notion of ghost guns really briefly. What I can gather is that the word ghost guns is meant to cover a few different things. First and foremost, firearms that have been manufactured in the past without serial numbers. And I want to make it clear to everyone here that there are thousands, maybe tens of thousands of them in existence, owned by perfectly honest, decent people who will never, ever use them in a crime. And that if the ultimate bill that passes this legislature on ghost guns includes these firearms, it will make many, many decent people into felons overnight. And I will caution my colleagues to prevent that from happening because that will not solve any problem. It also, from what I gather, includes 3D printed guns, which I can understand the hype and concern about 3D printed guns, but I don't know that there's been a recorded incident, at least not in Connecticut, of someone using one in a crime. And it's because it's really not an issue. The production of a 3D gun requires someone with a significant amount of know-how, technology, and equipment that your average criminal who's about to engage in some sort of, destructive behavior probably does not have. So I don't understand why we would be trying to go down that road. Aside from which, it's so much easier for criminals to obtain guns the old-fashioned way, which is to buy one on the street, which is something I promise I will get to before I'm done here. And then finally, I think the thing that really spurred the conversation about quote-unquote ghost guns is the notion of something called an 80% lower receiver, which is, for lack of a better term, a block of metal that could be used as the framework for what could become a gun later. The lower receiver is the part that typically has the serial number when a gun is manufactured by a firearm manufacturing company. And that's because they've got to put a serial number on something. And this is the basic structure that everything attaches to, the trigger, the barrel, all of those things. But it's by itself, it is just a piece of metal. I said to someone the other day when we were having this conversation, think of it this way, an 80% lower is 80% of that part of the gun, but it's still only 10% of the gun. The thing about that is that the quote-unquote ghost guns that can be purchased online invariably are made to be produced into AR-15 type rifles, which means that they would already be against the law under our current Public Act 13-3. It's also an odd ban because rifles are not where we should be looking to prevent gun violence. The statistics about gun violence are very straightforward. Virtually every time a gun is used in a bad act, it is a handgun and not a rifle, and it is almost always a gun that was illegally obtained. And the quite a few law enforcement folks that were before us at the public hearing, I asked them all that question. I say, hey, when you see gun violence, was that gun typically being used by a permitted, licensed person operating their own firearm? And they're like, no, that never happens. But it seems to me that that's the only bills that this place knows how to pass. It's just more and more and more on the people that are just trying to defend their own homes and their own children against harm that could come to them from some outside force that will pay no attention to any laws we pass here. So to me, the notion of ghost guns is a questionable policy matter. The bill is not going to prevent any measurable amount of crime. I think the only thing of value that you would get out of passing this legislation is the very, very few cases where someone purchased and assembled one of those 80% lower receivers into a firearm and then sold it to someone else or transferred it somehow that ultimately ended up being used in a crime. The problem is that every one of those things is already against the law, as was mentioned by my colleague. If you buy an 80% lower off ghostguns.com and you assemble it into a firearm, you've assembled an AR-15. It's already against the law. We don't need to write a law for that. If you sell it to someone without doing a background check, it's already against the law. We don't need to pass a law for that. Even selling it privately, you cannot do that anymore since we made it so you need a universal background check. I will say that this bill also only applies to people that will pay attention to it. I mentioned that criminals don't 3D print guns and they don't get 80% lowers off the internet and turn them into guns except in rare circumstances where they are already committing multiple crimes. They typically get their firearms on the street. We heard a lot, by the way, at the public hearing about the notion of universal background checks, which is something that I do support. But I want to just point out to people that a universal background check is not universal, and they should know that. A universal background check is voluntary. If me or any of my colleagues in here, because we are law-abiding citizens, want to exchange a firearm, we will no doubt go through the process. We will go down to the gun store and we will fill out our paperwork and go through the background check and pay our fees, and everything will be hunky-dory. The thing is that we were never going to cause a problem ever to begin with, but we were just put through that situation for nothing. But the criminals that are going to do some terrible act, they're going to rob someone, break into someone's home, commit a murder, rob a liquor store, whatever they're going to do with that gun, they're probably not doing that. They're going to buy their gun on the street without any background check because they would have to volunteer to go through a background check. So don't for 1 second think that it's the end-all, beat-all to have universal background checks. I don't mind. I'm happy to do it, happy to support it. but it is not going to solve the main problem, which is illegal guns. The problem with this bill, I already mentioned that it's going to be ineffective at solving any type of real impact on fighting crime. The problem with it is that it's going to wrap up into what it covers a lot of decent, honest people that are never going to be in a position to be doing harm to one another anyway. There are plenty of people in our state that are enthusiasts. They are so into their hobby of target shooting or hunting that they are very, very interested in the inner workings of a firearm and are very passionate about the design and construction and everything else that's necessary to assemble and put one together. But these are kind people. They just have a hobby and an interest that might be different than what somebody else might be interested in. Imagine your own hobby, whatever it is, if suddenly your hobby was being impacted because somebody else might use that type of thing for some type of crime. People who shoot targets, people who hunt, even Olympic athletes are involved in working on their own firearms. So my main point of all of this conversation really is just to say that all of this effort on bump stocks last year and ghost guns this year is taking away from what we should be doing. The first thing we should be doing is prosecuting the actual criminals that commit crimes with guns. I wish I had brought the statistics with me, but they were mentioned several times throughout the public hearing, just how poorly our state handles the prosecution of gun violence. Most of the crimes that people are apprehended for, ultimately, they are turned away and never prosecuted. Even a former president of the Citizens Against Gun Violence, Ron Pinciero, wrote an article in November of 2013 saying the real problem with gun violence is inner city illegal guns. His quote, he acknowledged it, I agree. And I will also point out that we are all against gun violence, particularly people that own firearms, which I know their main focus is the protection of themselves and their families against other types of violence or gun violence. So I suggest that there are other things that we could be doing that are much more effective than working on bump stocks and ghost guns and whatever the issue du jour is. We can actually do things. Prosecute criminals and get illegal guns off the street. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would like to offer an amendment. It looks like I don't know if the clerk passed it out or not, but if he has, I would like to move that amendment and give me a second to explain what the amendment does.
Is there a second on the amendment? Amendment moved by Senator Sampson, seconded by Senator Bizzarro. Senator Sampson, you may remark on the amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is a very, very simple amendment. I believe that if we are truly interested in actually making our state safer and attacking the subject of gun violence, we should do so. I have led this charge to make these two things happen, and somehow they always get overshadowed by ghost guns and bump stocks and who knows what. This amendment would take money that we use now to pay for our political campaigns, for bumper stickers, and for those shiny pieces of mail that everyone loves to get in September and October, that are paid for by taxpayer funds. It would use that money instead to do two things. One would be to begin funding something called the Statewide Firearms Trafficking Task Force. This is a program that was created in the wake of Sandy Hook and was part of Public Act 13-3. And what it does is it allows local law enforcement officials in various towns across our state to communicate with each other so that they can track gang activity and they can crack down on illegal firearms and get them off our streets so they do not fall into the wrong hands and cause harm to anyone. It's very sad, but I will point out that that statewide firearms trafficking task force, great idea, very happy when it was created back in 2014, was only funded for the 1 year. And then I guess it was passé, and we didn't need to fund it any longer. This amendment would use money from the CEP, the Citizens Election Program, to fund the statewide firearms trafficking task force in the amount of $2 million per year. It would take the balance of the money and use it to establish a grant program whereby towns and cities across our state could apply for a grant to put a school resource officer or two in their local school systems. These are actual, genuine things that will make our world, our state, our schools, and our streets safer. Getting illegal guns off the street and putting school resource officers in schools. And I urge my colleagues to adopt it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. On the amendment, I will ask my colleagues to oppose the amendment